Okay, today I am going to talk a bit about version control, specifically Mercurial with TortoiseHG, which is my client of choice for Mercurial. So, assuming that you don't know anything about version control, what version control is, and it's super important. It's completely ubiquitous in the software world. If you work as a software developer anywhere, then you should be using version control, and anybody that you're working with should be enforcing that you're using version control. So what is it? Version control, the basics of version control are creating snapshots of your project every time that you make a change. And the idea behind that, particularly for software projects, for code, is that sometimes you introduce bugs, and you need to be able to compare your project as it stands now to what it might have looked like yesterday to figure out how you created this bug. And it has a lot of other uses than that too. There's a lot of really useful things about version control. If you've ever worked on any kind of even remotely code-based project with somebody who wasn't using version control, and you might have done a lot of sending zip files and emails or handing each other flash drives with projects on them and trying to figure out how you merge your changes with theirs. Version control exists to make all of that much easier as long as you know how to use it. So the basics of version control. So like I said, it's about creating snapshots. So if you take a look at so this is TortoiseHG. This is the client that I use. This area on the left here is the repository registry. This is basically all of the projects that I have that I work on. When starting out, you'll just have one project. So here is the NAP project, and really we can just focus on one project for now. I might add some other ones here to kind of show you how things work too. So this is sort of the main, this is the, I don't actually know what the name is for this, but this is sort of the revision view, and particularly this thing on the left is the graph view. So let me make this just a little bit bigger. So each of these lines in this view is a different revision. So each of these is a snapshot of what this project looked like at a given point in time. So how does it create these snapshots? Well, you have to sort of tell it to create a snapshot. So your working directory up here, you'll notice this looks a little bit different than these other lines. It has like these stars around it. The graph looks a little different. It's like an empty circle, and it's still connected to the previous dot in the graph, but it's an empty circle. And you'll notice all of these have a revision number, but the working directory has a revision number of 24 plus. So the working directory is sort of a it's basically the current status of your project folder. So it doesn't exist as a snapshot yet. So right now you can see, I'm actually not even sure what these changes are, but if you click on working directory, it'll show you what has changed in your project. So right now I have 2 changes, and just to give you kind of an example, let's see. I'm going to open, I'm going to explore this project, and let's say I go into one of my scripts and I want to make a change to it. I'm just going to use Sublime real quick just to make a meaningless change. I'm going to add some space here. There should be some space there anyways. So now if I go to my working directory and I refresh, oh, I didn't even need to refresh, it was already there. The script appears here, and Tortoise, or HG, knows that some spacing changed. See, there's a little plus sign here showing that this line was added, and maybe some other formatting happened that I wasn't aware of, but that's just because everything got moved down. So it keeps track of every single change that happens. And so let's say I've made a couple of changes. I kind of have like what I see in my mind as like a meaningful snapshot. This is not a meaningful snapshot, but for the sake of this tutorial, let's pretend that it is. Um, Cleaned up spacing in beatbase.cs. So this is my commit message. This is my description of what has changed in this snapshot. Having descriptive descriptions is definitely a good idea, because when you're trying to track things down, or you want to know, particularly when you're working with other people, it's really nice to be able to just read these and have a good idea of what happened in that revision, so that when you're jumping around in revisions, you know what's going on. So I've got my revision here. I've apparently got probably some small scene changes to the Unity scene, and now I want to create a snapshot out of that. Well, now that I have a commit message and I've selected these files, I'll just click commit to do that. And before I do that, I just want to mention that when you create a revision, generally you want to look carefully at this file list here. A lot of the time you'll have many more files than this, maybe even hundreds of files, depending on what you're doing. Currently, it's only showing me the files that have changed, and it's showing me untracked files, which this is the only untracked file in the project, and it's just a file that I don't care about creating a snapshot of, because it's not important. So, for instance, I'm not really sure what these scene changes are. I can't preview them right now for some reason, and maybe I'm not convinced that that's something that actually needs to be committed. So I'll just uncheck those, and I will commit just this spacing change. So I'll hit commit, and it creates a snapshot. So now that this snapshot exists, we always have a record of what the project was at that point. So I can jump back. Let's say I want to go to revision 4 really early on in this project, and I just right click it, say update, and then I click update here, and okay, I have some local files that need to be resolved. Oh, that's because I didn't commit those. I'll take local. Don't worry too much about that right now. So now you can see that I am on revision 4. It's circled, and then my working directory is still connected to my current revision, because anything that I'm doing in my directory right now is a child of whatever revision I have updated to, and the graph splits to indicate that there are other children of this revision that have had snapshots created of them. So, in fact, I went back to a revision where I believe that, that file that I was just editing, scripts beatbase, no longer exists. In fact, the scripts folder doesn't even exist at this point. But you can see if I update here, back to the snapshot that I just created, might take a second. There's a lot of image assets that it's having to pull. So in a project like this with tons of images, it's gonna take a while. In fact, I might need to do some stuff to the repository to make it faster. File conflicts, so this is the same thing. I'll just take local. Okay. So now I'm back to where I was, and you can see, that's the wrong one, that now my scripts folder is here again, and my beatbase file is there. So it really is just like a time machine for your software project. Okay, so let's talk a bit about how to actually use it. So you kind of saw me go through and just create a revision. There's a little more to it than that, though, particularly when you're working with other people. So I'm going to go ahead and create another copy of this as if I am sort of two different people editing the same project. And this is where it gets more complicated, but it's also really where the power of version control comes in. So when you add this repository, this is actually going to be how you do it. So this might be a good thing to take note of. Basically, I'll give you this URL for the repository. It's being hosted on Bitbucket, and you will right-click inside of your repository registry and click Clone. And in source, you're going to paste that URL, and then in destination, you basically just browse to wherever you want to put it in your on your computer. I have a Unity 5 projects inside of Documents, and we'll just call that NAP test because I don't actually need it, and I'm going to clone that. It's probably going to take just a minute. Okay. Okay, well, while it's doing that, well, I guess there's no use covering that. I'll just wait a second. Okay. Alright, so here is just another copy of the same repository. So imagine that NAP is the repository on my computer and NAP test is the repository on your computer. Now, let's say I stay up late one night and I am making some changes, and yeah, I'll go ahead and I'll just commit these the scene file and the solution file. It's not a great commit message, but it'll do for the purposes of a tutorial. Now, whoops, did not mean to double click that, sorry. This revision now, revision 26, is the most recent revision. We call that the tip. But if I go to this one, you'll notice this still says revision 23, so this doesn't even have, even though I just pulled it down, this doesn't have the one that we created just a minute ago where I cleaned up the spacing in BeatBase. Now the reason for that is because when you commit, committing is purely just creating a snapshot. You're not actually sending any of that anywhere. You're not syncing it with the server or anything. You're just creating a snapshot on your local machine. So what that means is it's really important to make sure that you do sync it with the server if you plan on actually collaborating with other people. So the reason that this is at revision 23 is because that's the last revision that was actually pushed up to the server. So you will notice, let's see what's the best way to do this. I should have waited to do that second commit, but that's fine. Now that I've committed these two revisions, I can click this up here to push the changes. And it's a good idea, probably, particularly with our project, to go ahead and just every time you commit, just push. There is a reason that they are two separate steps. It allows you to kind of do some advanced stuff and kind of like track things that you're doing and then simplify your revisions before you actually share them with other people, but you don't need to worry about that. If you add anything, when you finish at the end of the day, when you're done working on it, or even more often than that, you're going to want to commit and push. It's really important that you don't work on the project and then wait a few days before you push, or work on it for a week at a time and then push. It's really important that anytime that you make changes, you at least push once each day that you make changes, if not more often. And that just has to do with things getting out of sync and being harder to merge and stuff like that. So let's push. I have these two commits. I'm going to click push. It asks me if I want to push. I'll say yes. It might ask you for your Bitbucket credentials. There's a way to save those credentials in here. If I can remember how to do that, I'll go over it at the end of this. So I get a notification from Flowdoc that it has received the push, or that Bitbucket has received the push, and now I can hop over to my, or I should say your version of NAP, and it's still not here. So why isn't it here? It's because you have not pulled that information. So just like you have to push commits, you also have to pull them down. So this is basically how you sort of synchronize any new changes from the server onto your machine. So this push-pull kind of cadence is kind of the meat and potatoes of version control. You're going to be pushing and pulling every time that you access the project. So I pulled, and now I have these 3 revisions, right? But you'll notice that I'm still, my active revision, the one that my working directory is parented to, is still revision 23. So if I had changes in here, it would probably be a good idea to go ahead and either make a revision, or yeah, it'd probably be a good idea to go ahead and make a revision and then merge, which I'm going to have to go over as well. So let's say though, for instance, here there are no changes because we didn't change anything in this in your local copy. So we're still at revision 23. So since there's no changes, updating to 26 is really simple. We just right click, we say update. We shouldn't have to change anything here because there's no local changes, and we hit update. Takes a second to get some of those new files, and it's done. And then at this point, as long as everything is actually committed, then my project and your project should look exactly the same, which is great. Now, let's pretend that we didn't just do that. Let's go back to revision 23. And let's say that you made a change. Say that you made a change inside of BeatBase. Well, I guess that's the same change that I made. That's not a good example. Let's say you added a space down here. Now, you'll see that in our working directory, when we click on it, there's a file listed down here. And this file list, it'll show basically any file that is quote-unquote out of sync from the revision that your working directory is based on. So in this instance, there's only one, and that's the thing that we just changed. And it shows you it'll have a letter or a symbol next to it. M means that it's been modified. If it has a question mark, that means it hasn't been tracked. If it has an exclamation point, that means that the file's missing. You probably deleted it. And I think those are mostly the only ones that you'll see. So we have this modified file, and you just pulled down, and you're like, oh crap, I need to update to this newest revision, but I have a modified file, and we have this goofy split in the graph. We got to be careful how we do this. Well, it's not too bad. So also fixed spacing in BeatBase. So yeah, so you would go ahead and commit your changes before you try to update to mine. And when you do that, you'll see it created a new node, and it's separate from this other one. So these 2 revisions, they do share an ancestor, but they're separate from one another, and we don't want that. That means that we have 2 heads or 2 tips, and you can't push if you have 2 tips in a single branch. So what we have to do is from this revision, or technically from the working directory that this revision is based on, or I should say the working directory based on this revision, you want to do merge with local. And what that does is it analyzes the differences between all of these cumulative revisions that are not part of this revision's history, and it tries to basically automatically merge those changes in a sensible way. And it does a pretty good job. In this case, it is just going to probably just do it. One file was modified on both branches and must be resolved. Okay, so we're going to click on resolve, and beat base is the issue. So remember, we changed it on my local copy and on your local copy. So this is probably, what I'm about to show you is probably more than you'll need to know, because you're probably not going to ever be making code changes. But we'll go ahead and take a look at it real quick. So I'm going to open up my, oh, okay, it just resolved it automatically. That makes sense. So the reason it resolved it automatically is because on your copy we've added a space down here, and on my copy we added a space down here. So the only time that there's really a conflict is if you're editing the same lines. So if I had added a space here and you added, you know, a new function or something, then it would say, hey, you know, these changes happened on the same line. How am I supposed to know what to do with this? And then you would have to decide which which change you want to keep. So no conflicts, ready to commit. So now that this merge is actually, now that we're doing this merge, you have to create another node, basically another snapshot that represents the merged project. So merge is usually a fine commit message when you do that. So I'm going to commit that, I'm going to finish, and there we go. Now we have this version of it where we have our space at the top and then we have our space down here. So that's a merge. Now if you're an artist, you are probably not going to be even really having to deal with merges. If you sit down to work on the project and you pull before you start, just like that, click that guy, and then you make changes and you commit and you push when you're done, then odds are there's not really going to be any conflicts. I can deal with the merging, etc. So don't be too afraid of the merging. You're probably not going to have to do it, and if you ever have any problems with it, you can contact me. Just, you know, let me know what you're running into. There are some interesting things that can happen with version control, and you know, you just gotta slog through it, and you can ask me for help whenever you have questions. And there's a wealth of information about version control in general on the internet, and Mercurial, which I'll remind you, the particular type of version control that we're using is called Mercurial. So there's a lot of information online. Now I want to cover at least one other really important use case, especially for you. Since you are going to be generating art assets, you're going to be adding files to the project very often. So let's just as a test, so we're going to use your project since yours is, you are the artist. I'm going to just drag this image file from one of my favorite board games into the assets folder. This probably isn't where I would actually put it, but let's call this test.jpg. Now when I go into here, into Tortoise, and I look at my working directory, if I refresh it, there's a new file here. So when I refresh this, it scans over the directory and basically scans every single file, and since every file in here is tracked except for this one and this one that we just added, it doesn't display them because it knows that there's been no changes to those files, so they're irrelevant to any potential new snapshot, because there's not any changes, and that's, a snapshot is really only interested in what has changed. So we're still not interested in committing this orig file, and in fact I need to get rid of that. I'm actually just going to delete it. Okay, and we have this image down here, and if you're adding, you know, you're adding tons of assets, you're going to have tons of these images. So whenever you're adding stuff to the project, just make sure that you look really carefully in this pane, because there are times where, you know, you have a lot of stuff in this pane. Maybe a lot of it is stuff that you don't actually want to add to the project. Maybe it's just like test images that you had in there or whatever, and you don't want to put those in the project for the sake of you know, not bogging down the server. So just, you know, make sure you take a good look in here, and you're carefully selecting what it is that you're actually committing, or pushing, I should say. So we want to commit this test JPEG. So all you do is check it, click on the check mark here. Again, add a meaningful commit message, added test.jpg, and commit. And it'll ask you if you want to add the selected untracked files. The reason for that is just currently this file is untracked and we have it selected, and it's not technically added yet. So one thing you could do is you could right click it and say add, and it changes its status to added. And then when you commit, it doesn't ask you that, but I tend to just check them and then commit and say yes, I want to add them. I find it a little easier, a little more straightforward. So now we have this new node where we've added test.jpg. Now, when you commit, remember, you have to push. So let's push this, because if we don't, then in my version of the project, if I pull, see, I didn't get anything new from the server because you haven't told the server yet that you added this file. So let's do that. We're going to click push outgoing changes. We're going to say yes, enter our credentials if it pops up, which in this case it won't, and it's pushed. It pushed the image. Now I'll hop back over to mine. I'll pull, and there we go. We have your spacing change, we have the merge that you did, and then we have the commit that you did after you merged. Now I don't have any changes in my working directory, and if I look at the graph here, my most recent revision is a child of your revisions, so I can safely just update to this. I don't need to worry about doing any merges because I didn't have any changes or anything. Okay, so like I said, you probably won't have to worry too much about merging or anything. The main takeaways are just pull before you start doing anything, push after you do anything, and whenever you push, commit first. You have to commit in order to do a push. You can't just push. So that pretty much covers the basics of how Mercurial is actually used. The only other thing I really want to mention, particularly for this project, is that working with Unity in Mercurial is a little bit weird, because one of the main files that you're going to be committing very often is this .unity file, and that is a Unity scene. And there's a lot of stuff that you do in Unity that changes things about the Unity scene, and it's also really hard to merge Unity scenes. So it's likely that if you start doing the tile painting and stuff in Unity, it's likely that I'll just let you handle that so that I don't have to worry about merging our scene changes, because if you, let's say you build a level inside of a scene in Unity, and I'm editing that same scene, it's basically going to be impossible to merge, particularly with this tile editor that we're using. But that being said, like, there's a lot of really easy ways to get around that. Like, we'll probably have a different scene for every level in the game, which makes it a lot easier because you can be editing one level and I can be editing the other, and we can just make sure that we commit every day. And then if you say, hey, I want to do some work on that level that you were working on, I'm like, all right, I'll make sure not to make any changes to it. With as small of a group as we have now, it's pretty easy to just concede that kind of thing and not worry too much about the tools not being perfect. But for the most part, I'm hoping that my work will be focused on writing code, developing behaviors for enemies, fixing some of the animation issues, stuff like that, and the actual level design and everything will be more in your court, and that way we don't have to worry too much about having to make changes to the assets, and I have to get the changes from you, and then I show you what doesn't work about it in the tile editor and stuff like that. Instead, you can just directly be building the levels in the tile editor, and when you become more comfortable with how that works, you'll have a really good idea of how you need to produce assets moving forward on future levels and stuff. So that being said, the next thing I want to talk about is how the project is actually set up in Unity. I am probably going to make a separate video for that, I might make that video today, but I might wait until the weekend to do that. Basically, I'm just going to go over how the tile editing works, some basics about how to get around in Unity, and some pitfalls probably, just to get you started with that. But for now, try just downloading the project, maybe even open in Unity just for kicks. And remember, if you are messing around in Unity and you break anything, it's really easy to just come back here into Tortoise, and let's say, for instance, here, I'll give you an example. Oh crap. Let's say I open up Unity, and I open up an AP. It's a little slow. Oh, yeah, I guess I technically added an image and made some changes to that script, so it has to recompile before it'll open. Alright, so let me shrink this window down a little bit. So, you know, let's say that I didn't know what I was doing, as you might not know what you're doing, and I really broke something. Let's say I accidentally deleted all this stuff, and that'd be really bad. That's terrible, you know. All this level is totally broken now. But on the bright side, well, I have to save this first to illustrate what I'm saying. On the bright side, I can just go to my working directory, and I'm like, oh, this is the file that changed, the scene. Well, since I broke everything, then I will just go back to the revision that my working directory is based on. I'll say update, and then I will discard local changes. And basically what that means is all this stuff in my working directory that I haven't created a snapshot of yet, just blow it away, get rid of it, I don't need it. Click update, and then when I hop back into Unity, it'll ask me if I want to reload, of course, because it notices that things have changed. I say reload, and everything is back the way that it was. And that's the beauty of version control right there. It really minimizes the risk of making mistakes, as long as you do your commits and your pushes frequently. Alright, so that is TortoiseHG in a nutshell, hopefully. Let me know if you have any questions, and I will hopefully be able to answer them right away. Like I said, the Unity specific stuff at the latest will happen sometime this weekend, but it'll probably happen sometime this weekend. So I might decide to do it tonight, but I still have some work I have to do. So, alright, good luck, and let me know if you have any questions.